Now we're going to get some photos here of armed civilians, Vietnamese armed civilians. The Viet Cong were armed civilians. In other words, guerrilla fighters with no uniform. Their ranks were made by men, women, and sometimes very young kids. They used any clothing while fighting, and when at risk of capture, they used to throw away their weapons, hoping to be mistaken for civilians. The Vietnam War caused so much civilian deaths also because of this fighting attitude. On the right, one of the very few garments the Viet Cong used very often, the so-called black pajama. Black pajama, also in the Stephen Chang brought that up. Black pajama was was something they used on the First Blood set that we never got to see in the Rambo movie First Blood. It's something you will get to see in the Rambo prequel, Blood the Ghosts of War, because Stephen Chang brought in all of the scenes that were deleted. So we're going to get to see Rambo, how he was captured, all that stuff. It's very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. Anyway, back to this. Lacking the use of uniforms, this was the only easy, available, low visible dress for the Viet Cong. The scarf, the Can Ran, represented the soldier's rank. The North Vietnamese battle dress uniform with its notorious tortoise-shaped helmet. And he has a picture of the tortoise-shaped helmet here. Amongst these men with the flag and the garment posed. So now we're going to move into the heart and the meat of what Wallace has given us. The Baker team. The 8-page preview. 8-page preview of, in total spoiler fashion, as donated to us by Wallace Lee, of the Rambo Year 1 sequel, The Baker Team. Alright. So here we go. Baker Team. Samuel Troutman committed his first murder near the end of 1962. Someone called Ryan, a CIA greenhorn, one of the good guys. It wasn't a simple execution of an enemy spy, but a plain and real murder of a U.S. citizen. Ryan came in Southeast Asia in 1962, 6 months before Troutman did. He came in Indochina with the task of passing U.S. weapons to the many irregular forces that used to fight against the communist Mont Garde, FULRO, arrows, and etc. In the beginning, the CIA agent behaved well. He disguised himself as a real gun smuggler and cheaply passed everything he had to pass, and always to the right people. But Ryan understood very well how things really went in Vietnam, and soon started to take advantage of it. Places you go, customs you find. During the time lapse of the year, the number of weapons mysteriously disappeared while at Ryan's hands, increasingly excessively. Ryan had understood that expanding was real business. In other words, finding new suppliers and new buyers, always selling some more and to everyone, the Viet Cong included. 1 year later, Ryan had his hands on everything: prostitution, drug refineries, slavery. Above all, he started asking favors as payment. So to be sure to have so many friends to always get away with it, with every situation or trouble he would have ever ended up with, even with the Americans. Also, because all things considered, in order to get a universal immunity in Vietnam, You only had to bribe the South Vietnamese army, and nothing was easier than that. So Ryan tried it, did it, and because rich, powerful, and autonomous, and the idea that one day getting back to Langley didn't even cross his mind. In Vietnam, he lived as a king, then inside a sumptuous country house, protected by his own army of men. Sorry, I'm nasally here, my cold. He was the living example of the Vietnam dream, from low-level spy to warlord in a blink of an eye, and with his hands in almost any criminal activity, with friends protecting him between both the ARVN and the Viet Cong. He didn't really work for the CIA for a long time, even if on the papers he still did. But he did everything on his own, with weapons supplied by private civilian citizens from all over the world, Americans, South Africans, Chinese, and even Russians. He bragged himself for selling everything to anyone, and as a real U.S. pro. He lived in a big colonial country house right in the outskirts of Saigon, surrounded by armed guardsmen, as if he was an important diplomat or an unexisting nation. Ryan used to launder his money, investing it on his General Motors plant in Saigon, which was a very good way to both clean the money and get even more very important friends. The GM Motors had no idea where all of this money came from, nor had any interest about it at the time at all, nor the South Vietnamese had. When you invest tons of money in a third world country, no one asks you where all the money came from. They don't even want to know. Ryan ended up under Troutman's sights when he started studying the grounds to go into politics in the near future. Going into politics in Vietnam was slightly different with respect to the U.S. and meant poking your nose between the intrigues of the capital city and the ranks of the Prime Minister in Diem, a favor here, a bribe there. And you started having a role over the government's decisions too. But Ryan never got as powerful as he wished to be. Once under Troutman's sights, his days as a king were doomed to an end, and by hook or by crook. After 6 months in Vietnam, Troutman's period of adjacent as a spy was over. The time had come for the colonel to take initiative, to take actions on his own, and Ryan was the first on the colonel's list. But Troutman was going to kill the CIA agent no matter how dirty. He and Gardner were not authorized, and Ryan had his ass much more covered than that. So at the very first initiative ever, the colonel was taking an all-in bet already. The credibilities, careers, and lives. He and Gardner were being a very high stake over a very hard match to be fought. Kind of brings you back to Rambo 2, doesn't it? When Murdoch says, you're risking your family's security, your life, your career, everything here. Do you think one man is really worth that? It brings me back to that. It kind of sees that, Troutman's always going to get his man, He's always going to get his man. And even in that film, there's that look that, when Troutman's like, damn right, it kind of foreshadows that it's not the first time he's had to get his hands dirty like that and put things on the line. Anyway, back to the story. First thing, Ryan succeeded in convincing a couple of CIA, very important senior officers about being a good child and to sell those he was supposed to, only using no secondary channels, and even if none of it was true at all. Those two bigwigs were much more powerful than Troutman, and because of their friendship with Ryan, They made Troutman and Gardner look like too paranoid amongst the other CIA agents. In other words, the two bigwigs spread the word that Troutman and Gardner were those kind of guys used to witch hunt. In those days, Troutman's notoriety as a rebel was just starting to spread out. So most of his Secret Service men believed in Ryan's friend's version of the facts. As a secondary factor, had anybody pushed Ryan against the ropes, he would have turned out taking not just with his own commanding officers, but the press too. He knew some very hot details about many so-called victories about the Viet Cong that can make those victories become much more realistic, as to say. During 3 massacres, at least, the ARVN made a clean sweep of all his inner opposition, not communists, and did with the full knowledge and help of some U.S. advisors. The corpse of some children charred by napalm ended up being considered as Viet Cong killed in action too, and Ryan knew names, dates, places, and facts enough to create a major outrageous scandal.